exploration of art. I got to just explore why it was important to me. So to start off, I'm related to several people who are museum enthusiasts in the Boston area. Given their relative closeness geographically, I would visit these relatives often throughout my childhood, and still continue to visit them to this day. During each visit, I found myself being dragged along to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. At first, I thought little of the seemingly endless walks through the hallways of old art, but as I grew older and started to take art more seriously, my attitude shifted. Still, when I was confronted with the reality that I would most likely do something related to visual arts for my senior seminar project, I approached it unenthusiastically. I knew I enjoyed looking at art and making it, and I was content with that understanding. I didn't really feel that it was necessary to explore further what I thought was interesting about it. But it's one thing to think art's cool, and it's another thing to go up on stage and impress the coolness of art upon a crowd of people who aren't me and don't know what I think. So the point of my senior seminar project, in essence, was to figure out why art was cool for myself and open myself up to the art world a little bit more. I accomplished this through several means, the first of which being my studies in acrylic paint, which is a medium I never previously worked with or hadn't worked with often. This gave me the opportunity to experience something that I'd grown accustomed to in a new light. I also interviewed a Concord painter, Melissa Miller, who gave me insights into the inspiration behind painting and the work that goes into creating marketable art. So this is one of her paintings of a mountain scene. And then, so what makes art cool? There are several factors that contribute to this. So one, humans get a lot of their information visually about the world. And so I've no doubt that all of you have heard the expression that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So with art, it gives the creator the ability to handpick visual information and exercise complete control over what the piece says, so they can choose what words go into the picture and just create their own message completely from scratch. Art also reflects culture because people are raised in an environment and they tend to reflect some of the qualities of the environment. And so when you look at a piece of art, you can sort of see into the creator's influences, into what their environment has impressed upon them. And also, art helps us enjoy life, because as a senior, it's especially become apparent to me how fast life moves, and how quickly moments fly by. So with art, you can get sort of a screenshot or a captured image of a period in time that you'd like to remember. So to illustrate these points and just talk a bit about art and some of the paintings that I appreciate, I have a couple paintings to show you and some stories to tell. The first of which revolves around Edward Munch. Now, a lot of you are probably familiar or have seen his painting, The Scream. It's pretty popular. It depicts this sort of characterized version of a person just screaming, holding their heads in agony. The color choices are very bleak and dark. It's not a very cheerful painting at all. So to analyze what went into this, what story he's trying to tell, I had to go and do some research on the guy. So Edward Munch was born in 1863 and he died in 1944. And he lived through World War I and II. He was the second of 5 children, born into a very poor family. So as a kid, the resources were spread thin. He was often ill, just very sick. His mother and sister died when he was very young of tuberculosis. So those deaths just haunted him throughout his life. And his deeply religious father never really encouraged his success in arts. He wanted him to go into a medical field or something like that, more profitable. So he really came about his art, because of that, his art and his influences of death and just morbid scenery really wove themselves into his work and ingrained themselves in his work pretty thoroughly. And also like the influence of war, which is just a bleak and terrible thing to begin with. Another artist I looked at was Andrew Wyatt with his painting Christina's World. Andrew Wyatt was born in 1917 and he lived until 2009. He had 4 older siblings, and his father was a famous illustrator, which is sort of the polar opposite of what Munch's father was, really. And because his father was a famous illustrator, he made a pretty good living, was able to support the family comfortably, and so his father purchased a nice house in Pennsylvania. It was pretty isolated, and so his father and other tutors would educate the children. The father gave the children access to good music, literature, and creative activities, and Andrew Wyatt was trained like exclusively by his father in his early years and by tutors, so he would often like sit in his studio and learn directly from him, which really influenced his style, because as opposed to Munch, who was discouraged and had to like look for tutelage outside, Andrew Wyatt had the opportunity to grow up with and like be immersed in the arts, and this really influenced him because his style was much more refined. You can see in this painting, it's very, very like detailed, very accurate in depiction of like real life. And one thing that his father stressed when he was learning how to paint was the importance of developing an emotional connection with the subject. And so throughout all of his paintings, even though he stuck to realism, Andrew Wyatt relied on color a lot and perspective to set painting's mood. And as you can see here, like from behind the perspective of this woman looking up at the house, you feel this feeling of like distance or longing. And also, Andrew Wyatt is far more well off, so in terms of his culture and his community, he was really able to step out of himself because he was so comfortable and look out and see other people and what their influences were and connect to them. So Christina's World in particular is his most famous example, or it's one of his most famous examples of painting. And as Wyatt worked on this piece, he was able to get a residence in the country in this very rural setting, as displayed in the picture. So you can see like all the grass and stuff, the barn house. The woman who lived in the house at the time that let him stay there, Christina, had lost her ability to walk over the years, and this picture portrayed that Christina in the field next to her house. To the casual observer, though, the image could display longing or loss and distance, and the painting does such a wonderful job of that because of Andrew Wyatt's skill. But the story behind it was that Andrew Wyatt was walking around the premise, and he saw this spot that was worn out in the grass where Christina would sit and look up at the house. So he decided to portray that. On a lighter note, the next artist and the last artist I have to show you, really, is Gleason, and he did these works called, in the series called The Bad Guys Club. Now, he's a modern artist, so a lot of his work he puts out on social media. He was born like in the 90s, and he grew up around cartoons and B-movie, bad like villains, horror movies, and he was heavily influenced by that. Throughout his education, he never really enjoyed it particularly, and so he didn't seek secondary education or any sort of professional help, and instead, right out of high school, he just dropped out and started working on art. And so his style is very, like, self-cultivated, I don't know, really just reflects his influences more than anything else, much like you could see with Munch's, where, like, it's just a very cartoony style. It's pretty simple to understand. And as a modern artist, he uses social media to get this work out and make money off of it. So they're all very simple because he has to produce a lot of them. He has to make a living somehow. And all right, so after all these artists, I want to talk about my own art a little bit because that's what this project was. It was me making art, learning how to just really grow into the artistic community a little bit. And so these first 2 pieces I made at the beginning of my project. The first one, you can see it's pretty rough. So they were both like just kicked off the adventure. And in this one I sort of hope to do like a Halloween-y vibe and learn how to use color a little bit. As you can see, like it's a pretty colorful painting. There's some candy, there's all sorts of stuff, because that was like the time of year, so my influences were the season. And in the second one over here, I decided to approach acrylic paint the way I had previously approached watercolors, and the theme of Halloween persists, as you can see. The next 2 were made after my visits with Melissa Miller, which proved to be pretty good and helpful. The first of which is just a study of my hand, and I used this study to practice color and texture and tone a little bit. And she encouraged me to map out the details on the first one and then paint on the second one. It looks sort of like a corpse hand or something, so I guess the Halloween-y vibe persists, but it's really just an attempt. In the second one, you can see I mastered. It's a more extensive study into skin tone. You can see I made some improvements on my original piece. Again, it's just pretty basic though. And last, I'd like to present to you my final piece, my winter image that I made when the holidays were ramping up. In this piece, I actually decided to try my hand at making a title. I call it "Tisn't the Season." And it's titled this because I created it at a time in the year when holiday spirit was ramping up. Snow was falling and the world looked beautiful. There was all this festive warmth to be felt, and yet I sat at home looking at my computer finishing Common Apps, and I couldn't have felt more unnatural. So I don't know, it was created out of a stressful time. You can see this guy in the center of the image looks sort of out of place, like a plastic tree or something, and I'm surrounded by like nature and stuff. So that was like basically what my project entailed, me just learning how to make paintings and stuff like that. So my closing message before I leave is that the very principle of art is to be original and let the personality of the creator show through. Art celebrates human differences, celebrates how differences make us interesting and fun. In my project, I got to explore not only my own ability to express myself through a new medium, but also the ways in which people's personalities show through what they do. I got to learn what really mattered about my craft, and it got to develop a further fascination and interest in it. Hopefully, with this presentation, I've shed some light on some art that already exists that needs to be appreciated and has been, and given you all a little bit of a reason to appreciate art on your own. Thank you. Any questions?
I'll ask a question. In terms of making art, because I've had you as an art student and you made that, your personality comes out in your art. We've talked a lot about your humor and things of that nature, but do you find beyond making art that it gives you something back? Like you had talked about the stress of the Common App, and do you find it as a relaxing exercise?
It's sort of like a release. I don't know. It's a nice outlet to express myself that I find kind of convenient and something I'm used to doing. Anything else?